from the All Indiana Podcast Network.
It's time for real conversation about the real issues that affect our communities.
Poverty, education, equality, and more.
This is Real Talk.
Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison.
Welcome to Real Talk on the All Indiana Podcast Network, and I am Reverend Charles Harrison. And on this episode, I will be talking with John Hall about this whole issue of reparations being paid to the descendants of enslaved people in America. Hello, this is Reverend Harrison, and I would like to welcome you today to my podcast, Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison. And I am so excited today. Every time I have John Hall with me, I'm excited. John Hall has a lot of farmers. He's the former Deputy Mayor of Indianapolis under Mayor Stephen Goldsmith. Around the time I first arrived in the city of Indianapolis, you are the former, director? What was your title with HUD? Director of HUD here, the State Director of HUD here in Indiana. And John is also a member of Barnes United Methodist Church, so I call on him a lot. And I also blame John and Glenn Howard for the former Senator Glenn Howard for getting me involved in community work and politics, but I'm so thankful for him to be with me today. And today, I always like to talk about issues that are going on, whether it be in Indianapolis or in our nation and larger society. And, I've been fascinated about the conversations, John, that have been taking place in California and some cities around the country. And there's been national conversation also around, this whole issue of reparations.
Correct.
And should the descendants of slaves here in America be given what many believe was a promise to Black Americans after slavery, of reparations. And at that time when President Lincoln was president, and you can give a little more of the history of it. I've heard Blacks always talk about we never got our 40 acres and a mule, and they feel like that would have helped Blacks recover from slavery, with the land and the ability, to make money for themselves and somewhat be on what some felt like closer to a level playing field with white America. So kind of give us some of the history for those who are listening today. We want to get into this conversation, and I want to get into what some of the polling is saying right now about this whole issue in America today.
Good morning, Pastor. I would say that reparations has been moved forward since the Civil War. Whether or not that was going to be a reality, I think has always been a question. After, I think it was 1862, Lincoln signed the bill that allowed slaves in Washington, D.C. only. He allowed those owners of those slaves, and I think we're talking around 3,000 of them, for the owners, those owners, plantation owners, to receive roughly $300 apiece for freeing those slaves in Washington, D.C. only. And so the history around the fact that plantation owners in D.C. were addressed, but the African slave, that has never been brought forward. I would say that there was a field order right after the war that was going to allow land from Savannah, Georgia, down to the Florida St. John River. That was where they were going to divide up 40 acres and allow Black families to become owners of that. They talked about taking the Confederate properties, those soldiers that had Confederate property,
right,
and dividing that land up. But as soon as Lincoln died, and you can see the political tension that was going to bring. I mean, the Civil War was fought between families, North and South. Blacks participated. But look at that tension that we were going to confiscate the land of Confederates and then divide that among the slaves. I mean, that, as a descendant of of people that were in slavery, I don't see anything wrong with that.
Right.
But you can see those individuals who had that land fought for slavery.
Right.
Even though they fought for slavery, they were going to be upset about that. And so I think we look today, will that ever come to fruition where blacks will be compensated for their ancestors being in slavery? And that's a very, very complex question.
So was that, what Lincoln had hoped to do before he was assassinated? So that included blacks that lived in the South as slaves or were slaves in the South. What about blacks who may have been former slaves that were in northern cities? Was they included? And then what was that number?
I don't believe so. But
okay.
I believe it was mainly focused on those slaves in the South.
In the South, okay.
That were being freed by the military.
Okay.
And that was a way where the people who were enslaved were going to be redressed.
Okay. So do we know what the numbers were back then of that number of black slaves who were still slaves, in the South, when the Civil War ended? Well,
Lincoln's proclamation ended all slavery in states that were fighting against the United States.
Right.
Fighting against this country. There is a number. I don't have it readily at hand, but there's a number. But it is a fight that has been going on since then, and I'm not sure if the country is ready to fight continually now. It's brought up a lot here in the last 30 years, maybe.
Right, it has.
Ta-Nehisi Coates has written books, feels that, there's a lot of scholars that are talking about reparations and how we ought to redress. The formula for that, I think, is the crucial part right there. How do you decide the number, who gets what? I don't believe there are very many black families who can trace their ancestry back to a farm or a plantation and say, there's my uncle, there's my grandfather, in order to hold up in court. Now, if this is something that we're saying that politically Congress ought to issue a bill in Congress that would allow African Americans to receive X, that's a big political question that I'm not sure that you're going to get votes to approve that.
This is Reverend Charles Harrison on Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison on the podcast, on the All Indiana Podcast Network, and my guest today is John Howell. John, one of the funny you raised that, because I was having a conversation with my mother this morning as I was doing my 5-mile run and walk, and we were discussing, my grandmother's side of the family. My grandmother's mother, Miss Walker, came out of Mississippi and moved, migrated north. Her husband had died, small town in Mississippi. And I asked my mother, was her mother or was her mother's mother, or mother, which would have been Grandma Walker's grandmother, a slave. And my mother didn't know. She was certain that one of them probably was, but we certainly, as a family, are not sure, what plantation the family came from.
Right.
We do believe that, certainly we are descendants of enslaved people, in Mississippi, but we're not for sure. And then on my when it gets to my biological father from Kentucky, my grandfather's side of the family, I'm not for sure, unless families have done that kind of history. Many of us could say for certain, where we came from as far as being enslaved.
Right. That's why the legal part, to me, is a much more difficult piece. And whether or not politically the country is ready to make that effort to address slavery here in America, to me, that's a wider question. And with the climate today, as divided as the country is today, I think it would be very difficult.
Well, here's what the polling is showing right now. There's a poll that was done not long ago about this whole issue. Do you support reparations for descendants of enslaved people? Only 30% of Americans support that overall, and 68% don't support it. Blacks support it at 77%. 17% of blacks don't support it. Only 18% of whites supporting the payment of reparations to descendants of enslaved people. 80% don't support it. Of Hispanics, 39% support it. 58% don't support it. And among Asians, 33% support it, and 65% don't support it. So it seems like on a national level, when it includes all Americans, it doesn't seem to be support for that. And I know California put a task force together, and they're looking at this whole thing of reparations, and they're hoping that it can become a national model. And I think when they look at the economic impact and the housing impact on descendants of enslaved people, I think they came up with over $200,000 per resident that was black in California that was a descendant of enslaved people. And I think the total number, and I'm trying to remember, I think it was like over $500 billion, and I just can't imagine what it would be on the national level when we have 40-something million blacks in this country, what that number would look like.
I think that's a huge number. And California is making an effort with a task force. Asheville, North Carolina also has a reparations fund that they are working to provide housing and business opportunities through this fund. I'm not sure if they've got a revenue stream coming into this fund or not, but it seems like that there are local areas that are more willing to address this, and maybe it's the political leadership there that is stimulating this conversation. In California, the city where Manhattan Beach exists, they just turned back over that beach area to the black family that it was taken from in the 1930s or 40s.
Okay.
And I'm not saying that was reparation, but there seems to be in some areas of the country a willingness to look at wrongs that have happened. You take the federal government. I mean, the FHA housing piece where they redlined black and Latino families where they couldn't get loans. Well, that's something that probably you can go and find evidence, and it happened. It exists. So those are things, and like the black farmers who were denied loans so they could keep their farms going.
Right.
That did go to court, I do believe, and I'm not sure, and I think they won, but I don't believe there's been any money distributed because there was an appeal, and I think it's still in the courts. So I think, the feeling that there's going to be a redress of wrongs because of slavery, I think is, as you can tell by the polling, it's something that the country is not ready to do.
The question becomes, John, will the country ever be ready for it when there were wrongs that were done to slaves in this country, or Africans who were brought to America as slaves? Will the country ever be ready for it? And do we just do it? I just don't know how we do it, but certainly there have been disadvantages that black people have experienced in this nation since, the freeing of blacks from slavery, going all the way back, and I don't know how do you pay the descendants back for 400 years of slavery and segregation and all of the disadvantages that, many black Americans have endured in this country.
I think a piece that is interesting to me is that Africans in Nigeria and Ghana and the West African part of Africa, they captured us,
right,
and negotiated with Europeans
right,
to bring us to wherever we were going.
Right.
So are they to be included in a reparations redress? I mean, that's a question that we don't want to deal with that piece of it.
So the question becomes, on both sides of the ocean, should there be some reparations based on those who sold us into slavery and then those who enslaved us here in America? That's a fascinating question.
It's an interesting piece, and so as we come down the line, are our problems today dysfunctional families, black violence, low education, low wealth gap? Is that due to slavery?
Well, I don't know when has that not been, except for maybe the violence issue. When has some of that not been a problem? Probably. When we started seeing the disintegration of the black family, when was that? 40s, 60s, okay, 60s. I know by the 60s there was some concern. So how much is the psyche of black Americans a result of slavery?
That is the question. Now, I think the leading activists today would say that slavery is the total reason that there is a wealth gap, that there is low education achievement. And, I'm not sure if I come down 100% with that logic. Because if you look here in this country, with all the faults you've got,
right,
African Americans went from a 10% black middle class body of people, say in the 20s and the 30s, to today I argue with people that we're at a 40+% black middle class who have achieved, who have bought homes, who've moved forward in education, who are locked into families that are solid. So if slavery impacted black people, then are you saying to me it only impacted some of them? It didn't impact those that achieved? That, to me, that's a debate that has to be taken. I think if we're waiting for reparations before we make a move to move forward, I think we're missing the boat. Because I think as a people, you got to take advantage of the opportunities that are here. And there are a lot of opportunities that are here.
Yeah, but I think one of the questions, and I struggle with this too, the conditions that black people have been in, as blacks migrated north, they moved into what we call the black ghettos, later the projects. Some have been able to come out of that. Some have been able to come out of that. I know when my parents got married, I remember us living in the project, but my mother was determined that we were not going to stay there because she wanted something better. But do the conditions that many blacks in this country have lived in, and that kind of disadvantage, the lack of wealth, has it been a major factor in the masses still being in that low income? And it seems to be generational, going back really for centuries.
Is that, yeah, but I'm saying, is that us, or is that us who are not raising our kids and locking in tight family net pieces? President Johnson in '65 started this war on poverty.
Right.
And he inserted into that legislation a piece that we now call affirmative action.
Right.
Richard Nixon sort of enhanced and expanded and moved that forward. And my question probably to you, with the growth of the black middle class from that period on, I think there was something like 11 million blacks received jobs and opportunities with this affirmative action piece. Is that a part of reparations that the country might have been making a move to address some wrongs?
I don't know, because I still think it has not addressed the masses yet, and I'm not for sure how we fix it. I was thinking, if we gave every black person in America $2 million or $1 million, will it level the playing field? Or in this country?
No.
It certainly would create a lot of pushback from other ethnic groups in America. Yeah, but you say no.
No.
Why you say that?
If we are on the lower end of the totem pole in education,
right?
If our families are single mothers, dysfunctional, single fathers that are dysfunctional, then the condition isn't going to change.
So you don't see the money changing the condition?
No.
Why not?
I just, because if you don't know how to utilize resources today, then this money here that you get will be gone in a short period of time.
Could the country, I'm not for sure that the country, with the number of African Americans in this nation today, could do that. Could we, provide reparations for descendants of enslaved people in this country? Is it possible? I guess it's possible, yes.
Today?
Yes.
I don't think it's possible today.
Okay.
Now, when I did make my statement about the infusion of $1 million wouldn't change anything,
right,
there would be people that would use it and make good use of it.
Right.
No question about
right.
that. But I'm pointing out, or I'm believing that the poverty, the dysfunction, the violence is still going to be here.
So what would be in your mind, what Black America needs to address too, if we're pursuing reparations and the conditions are still the same? What are some of the other things we need to try to address then?
I think that I was in South Africa in '98,
okay,
doing some work over there, and they had a Truth and Reconciliation Council.
Okay.
Where they went around the country and listened to everyone who had a grievance, who had a solution. We have not done that here in America. You know, slavery happened, and there has been no discussion or an address on reconciliation among groups here in America. I think that ought to be the first step that we take, is a commission that listen to the wrongs, and then what solutions might be done to get them right. Second, I think African Americans need a discussion among themselves.
Oh, yeah.
About how to take advantage of opportunities. What is the formula for getting ahead in the United States? And then looking to see where we are responsible for raising our children, for pushing education, for teaching thrift and saving and investment. You know, those are things that we have to be responsible for. Is the country, are there racist pieces in this country? Of course. And there always will be. But that doesn't mean you have to lay down and stop. That doesn't mean you have to become a statistics in prison. And it's been demonstrated by 50% of the black population
that have basically moved into middle class.
I argue they have. Yes.
Yep. That is true. I mean, this is a fascinating conversation because, I think we have to have the conversation. It has to be a larger conversation, because I'm not for sure if you have 68% of the population in America that is against it. How do we begin to have conversations with each other so that, because you hear this from a lot of white people, well, I didn't enslave anybody, and right. You're now asking me to, pay for what my ancestors did, but yet, there was a wrong that was done in this country to people of color, particularly black Americans in this country. And we have to talk about ways to address the wrongs that were done in America, and I would agree with you. There's some self-inflicted stuff that we have done that we need to address. And part of what gets me in trouble, John, is that I'm one of those blacks that say, we got to look in the mirror too. I agree that there's been institutional racism in this country, that we're still dealing with some racist systems and stuff that are, still not open to supporting black America. But yet we got to look at too, the self-inflicted things that we have done that we have to fix. And my concern is, if we do give reparations, I don't want to give people $2 million and they blow it in a year, and not everybody would. And not everybody would, but there would be some that would do that, and hopefully there would be a low percentage that would do that. You know what I mean? There's some probably in my family that would do that.
Yeah. The question would be, would the stats 12 months from then be the same? Right.
I think that's what you have to ask. And I think, we got to have that conversation so that the formula for how people have gotten ahead, black Americans, is something that is being taught to everyone, and so that if I have $2 million, then, 10 years from now, that money has been invested and it has grown, and I may have 4 million or 5 million, for me and my family.
That is going to be a tough job.
Yes.
It's a tough job, but I don't think reparations will happen. But I think what we have to you
don't think the younger generations are more open to that than those who are probably 50 and over, that maybe in several more decades,
everybody in this country, I believe every group of people in this country, except maybe the top 1%,
right,
would say that they've had unfair conditions somewhere, sometime in their history in this country.
Okay.
I used to teach at Tech High School, and I would every Friday when I'd throw a quiz, it'd be a surprise quiz.
Surprise quiz.
And I'd put on the top, ain't nothing fair.
Right.
You know, they would be griping.
Right.
You didn't tell us about this.
Right.
You know, and I would tell them, ain't nothing fair.
Right.
And that's the way, that's the piece here that we're dealing with here. Yes, there were wrongs, slavery, Jim Crow, the federal government with redlining. Yes. Now, the question is, will you get financial retribution from the United States for this? And I would say, the country might argue, well, we did affirmative action that allowed for 11 million blacks to get jobs. We did minority business set-asides, that allowed for black businesses to get contracts from the government and grow. Several here in Indianapolis. So there may be a counter argument that there's things that have been done to address past wrongs.
Yeah, but if we're running a mile race and you are already a half a mile ahead of me, then there's no way for me to catch you, and my argument would be is that's been the condition here in America, where white America has been a half a mile or even a mile ahead of us. So affirmative action would not level the playing field. Even if you were opening up job opportunities for us, it doesn't level the playing field because you already have the wealth.
You'll never have a level playing field.
Yeah, but can we get close?
You'll never have that, Pastor, because I think what we should be looking to do is have opportunities, equal opportunities. But if you're looking to say we ought to have an equal number, I think that's impossible. I mean, so what you're saying is we need to, not you per se.
No, go ahead.
But are you saying then that it's not going to be equal until this black family has 70,000 and this white family has 70,000?
No, I don't think it is. Maybe the white family is going to have a little more. They have 100, 200,000, but now, I'm closer to you. And from there, then there are opportunities for me to do something with that, so that I can improve the quality of life for my family and possibly increase the wealth within my family.
Not all European Americans are wealthy.
No, they're not. They're not. But
and during slavery,
yeah,
poor Europeans in the South,
right,
had no jobs,
right,
no school, and no training.
Right.
Do they get redressed too?
Well, no, they don't get redressed because it's not because they were enslaved. You can't get around. I don't think you can get around the fact that black Americans were enslaved. That and from generation to generation, 400 years of slavery. America cannot get around that. So somehow they have to address that, because I believe, as we were getting into the conversation, I believe that broken families is a byproduct of how men were used during slavery and taken away from their families to produce bigger, stronger slaves, and the breakup of the family. So psychologically has that impacted the thinking of generations of blacks, where we have moved from one woman to the next woman, and there hasn't been that commitment. Was that a part of it, and that brokenness in the family? I don't know. I'm not a psychologist, but I know that happened. But I know something has happened that is different for black Americans than what we see from a homeland in Africa, where the family is much stronger. So what happened?
I think we're using excuses.
We use excuses. John, I think it's more than that, but
I think we're using excuses.
Yeah.
Because a great percentage of the African American community are in families, are getting educated.
But 70% of black children still today are born in the single-parent households. That's 7 out of 10.
And if you believe that that's a remnant of slavery.
I think it could be. I think it could be. I'm not saying it is. I think it could be. I think there are conditions in our community that seem so unique than other ethnic groups in America that we have to look at why.
If this was factual, then we ought to have been having millions of babies out of wedlock in 1866, right after slavery.
No, they were, many husbands were being pulled from their wives and given to other slave masters to produce other babies.
We left slavery, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, at the highest rate of a family unit ever.
I agree.
And it wasn't until 160, 70 years after slavery that you're seeing these.
Yeah, but was that based on economics that we had to as sharecroppers in order to survive? So once the migration occurred and blacks started leaving the South from sharecropping into better jobs, we started to begin to see urbanization and the breakup of the family. So what happened?
I think what happened was, I don't think it was slavery. I think the movement north put us in a new environment, an environment that both man and woman were able to work, and those tensions may have caused trouble. But it's hard to convince me,
John. Sometimes the wife never made it north because there was another family.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Never made it north. This has been a fascinating conversation today that we have had, and certainly we have to continue this conversation. I don't know where all of this is going to go, but certainly there are elements within the country today that are pushing this issue. Yeah. Let's see what happens in California and some other cities across the country when it comes to this issue. But I certainly believe, agree with you, is going to be very challenging in the climate that we're in today in America. Thank you so much, John. I'm Reverend Charles Harrison, and this has been Real Talk. Join me next time as I bring you more real talk about the real issues that affect our communities here in Indianapolis and across the country. Be sure to follow and subscribe to this podcast and share it on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you so much for joining me today with my guest, John Hall, and I pray that you have a blessed and wonderful day.
This is Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison.
Be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast.
And be sure to check out other great podcasts on the All Indiana Podcast Network.
Online now at allindianapodcast.com.